What do these snare sounds have in common? They come all from this one snare, and they are only 15 seconds tweaking apart from each other. And in this video I'm going to show you how it's done. Hi everybody and welcome to Tidal Wave Studio. My name is Patrick Damiani and today I would like to talk about snare drums and especially snare tuning. You know, many drummers have lots of different snare drums to choose from when it comes to recording, to have different characters. But what if you only have one snare? Well, today I'm going to show you that with a few tweaks you can get a lot of different sounds out of just one snare. And as an example we are going to use my custom built beach snare that I made a couple years ago, and we are going to use just one skin, just one pair of sticks and a very simple microphone setup. So you could have even more different options if you would start playing around with different skins, different sticks, different microphones. But for now we are going to keep it very simple and just use tuning to get different sounds. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Okay, let's start with one thing that all these tunings will have in common, and that is that the bottom snare head is tuned really high as you dare to tune it. It won't break that easily, so don't be afraid. If it's really tuned high, you will get a really good response from the snare wires and get a crisp snare sound. If you put it too loose, you don't have a good response and you end up with like a trash can sound. So tune it high and you will get a good response. Now let's start with the most basic tuning. I am starting with all screws loose. And the first thing I'm going to do is turn up every screw one turn. So 2 half turns, and I'm going across starting with 1 and ending on the 10th screw. So 2 half turns here. So I'm feeling for where the screw starts to bite, and then I'm going 2 half turns all around. Okay, let's call this the basic tuning and see what it sounds like. Okay, that's a very basic snare tuning that will work for many different genres. You can tune it up or down a little bit depending on the pitch of the song, and it will most probably work fine. Okay, now, but what if you don't like those ringy overtones and you want to reduce them a little bit? Well, a very easy and very common trick is to use some moon gels. I'm just going to put 2 on top to dampen the skin a little bit more, and let's see how that sounds. Okay, this was a slight variation, a little bit drier than the first sound, but now what if you want it to be, let's say, more funky or a little bit crisper, a little bit higher in pitch? Well, let's just turn it up easy. We don't turn it up all around, but we just turn up the 3 screws that are furthest away from you. So I take the one that is the furthest and I put it up 3 half turns, and the 2 that are just besides it, I put them up like, 3/4 of a turn. And let's see how that sounds. Okay, that was a little crisper than the first 2 sounds. Now let's go in a completely different direction. Let's assume we want a kind of 70s sound, low, short, dark, and very thumpy. Well, that's easy. We just take our drum key, we leave the 3 screws that we turned up, we leave them high, and do the complete opposite on the 3 screws close to you. We just turn them completely loose until you start seeing wrinkles on the skin, completely loose. Now let's see how that sounds. Okay, that's really cool. It's completely different than what we had before. It was just a matter of turning a couple of screws. It's done in 5 seconds. Now let's go even more extreme, and I'll show you the advantage of having the bottom skin tuned really high, because if you have it really high, you basically can't do anything wrong, because the snare will sound like a snare whatever you do. I take an extreme example. I loosen all the screws all around so that you have zero tension on the skin. And you will see that it still sounds like a snare. It's a little bit like the 70s snare that we just had, but more extreme. So if you want a completely dead and dry sound, this is what you can do. Listen to this. Okay, really extreme, but cool and useful from time to time. In case you're wondering, I just put a towel over the hi-hat to make it a little bit darker and suit the timbre of the snare a little better. So now, let's assume you want this kind of really dry, dark, detuned sound, for example, live on stage, but you don't have time to tweak the snare. I will show you a really cool trick that I learned here at the studio from a great drummer. And to show you this trick, I'm going back to the standard basic tuning, like 2 half steps up from zero tension, and then I'll show you the trick. Okay, now we are back to our first basic sound, and the only thing we now need to completely change the sound is another snare head. You can use different kinds, and different kinds of heads will produce different results. This is one that I have lying around, so I'm just going to use it. We're going from this to that. Listen to this. Okay, how cool is that trick? It just takes you 1 second to completely change the sound of your snare. Now let's go to something completely different, but as quick to realize. We're going to simply place a little cymbal, I'm just using a little splash, on top of the snare and see what that does to our sound. Okay, this was a fun sound. You can use whatever comes into your hands and place it on top of the snare. Be that a little cymbal, rattly stuff, deadening stuff, whatever comes to your mind. Just place it on top and play around to get something a little bit more interesting than just a regular standard snare sound. Now let's see what we can do to get a very ringy live sound out of this drum. We go to our basic tuning that we had in the beginning, and we're just going to crank it up a little more and play it more on the outside to get a really lively and very ringy sound. Let's check this out. Okay, so I tuned it up all around, and I'm going to play it more outside and see what that sounds like. Okay, this sound was to demonstrate a little bit that you can get more overtones and more ringy sound by just playing more outside. You know, you have a lot of control over the amount of overtones that you have in your sound by playing more in the center. You get less overtones, and playing more to the sides, and depending on your snare where you play on the sides, and if you hit the rim a little bit more, that you get more or less overtones. Just play around with it and you will get like dozens of different sounds out of one tuning just by playing the snare differently. Okay, now let me give you one final example. We take our little towel and we place it on top of the snare and see what that sounds like. Well, this was yet another version of a very dead and dry snare sound. You can play around with the tuning below the towel, use different towels and get different results. This also helps putting down the volume of your snare a little bit if you play with a quiet ensemble in a very lively room and you need to tame your snare drum a little bit. I hope this inspires you to play around a little bit with your snare tuning and with different variations that you have. One snare does not mean one sound, and we did not even start by changing skins or microphones or sticks or the room or whatever. It's just the same setup, and every change was a matter of seconds to get a completely different sound. So this is what we got out of one setup. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this little excursion into drum tuning, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you need help with your production, check out the link to Tidal Wave Studio in the description below. See you, bye bye!